News, and we've missed quite a few weeks, and I want to tell you this. I'm sure you know, passing of Ole Anderson at 81 years old. So one of the top heels of the territory era, in an original member of the Four Horsemen and owner of the Georgia promotion, as well as at one point one of the highest paid and most respected bookers in wrestling. Ole Anderson died at the age of 81. And I'm trying to think it will be Mid-Atlantic when you first met Ole then, I figure.
Yeah, well, I think when I first met Ole, I believe it was the NWA. Obviously, quite aware of him. Growing up being a wrestling fan. The Four Horsemen were that first like mega heel group. There were others that were just as successful, but this is the first time with the advent of cable television in the mid '70s in America that sort of exploded it. Into like every young man's mind in America. Every kid was a fan of wrestling, and Ole was that guy that could look into that camera, and even before you met him, you could tell like those words were real words. Like you believed anything he said, and believed he was capable of doing anything that he said. And to me, those are the guys that in the business, as I look back. And I've had the opportunity to be in the ring with so many of these talented giants of our business. The guys that can do that, the guys that can look into that camera and make you believe of what they're saying, those are the guys that are going to draw money. And Ole was good at that. Now, we can get into the other side. Ole and I were like two that just never really clicked. Most people, I was with Tommy Rich last week, and we had a long talk about that because of his passing. And he didn't like him, and I think that was just Ole's, personality. The last time I saw Ole was at a gathering in North Carolina, T-Mart gathering. I was trying to clarify between them and the Juggalos. And Ricky Steamboat and I were taking group photos with a bunch of people. And I guess it was his wife rolled him in a wheelchair. And Ricky went straight over to him and started talking. I had to take a few more pictures. And as I was walking over, I saw Ole look up at me, and Ricky said, "You remember Shane Duncan's my partner, right?" And he looked up and he went, yeah. He didn't know who I was. And, it's, for me, differences aside, my personal difference with these people aside, after all the deaths that we've had in the business, over the years that I've been in it, and I think it's just a human thing. Like when you see somebody that was so vital and so strong and powerful personality, and you see them in this wheelchair and so frail, and the mind slipping away, it's tough to see. Ole, again, my differences with him aside, I in large part where wrestling was and even still is on the world stage. I think is in large part because of people like Ole Anderson. They were the building blocks that built this incredible industry that we've gotten to spend our lives. We've had the blessing of spending our lives in. It's so to guys like Ole, rest easy and thank you for what you did for the path that you provided for me. A true giant in our business.
Was there anybody that Ole actually liked? Because we were trying to compile a list, and we got to Mr. Wrestling 2, and maybe Dr. Tom Pritchard.
Yeah, Dr. Tom loves everybody, right? I think it was Ole's way, and I'll give you a little, give the listeners out there, the viewers out there, a little take. When I had first gone in and had my run with Ricky Steamboat, how I had gotten my foot in the door was Marty Jannetty had negotiated with Kip Fry to bring in the new rockers. Remember, he and I had done the rockers when Sean had injured his knee, and it was $5,000 a week. So I put my resignation notice in, for my teaching job, and get ready. And the week before, Kip Fry gets fired, and Marty has a party at his house where a girl ends up dead. So it becomes like, well, now we ain't got anything for you. And luckily, they had brought Bill Watts in, who I had gotten my break under. Excuse me. And he said, we'll find something for you. And in short order, he had me with Steamboat. but I was only getting paid $300 a night. Brian and Steve were both making like $250 a year, and Steamer was making like 5, 6, whatever he was making and deserved. And Bill came to me and said, "I need a personal favor." And Bill didn't ever talk like this. He said, "I can give you 300 a night, and I promise you, beginning of the next quarter, I'll have my full budget. I'll get you up into the neighborhood with these guys." I said, "Okay, I'd make that commitment to him." I really didn't have a choice. I mean, I'd already quit my teaching job. So at the end of that quarter, he came to me and said, "I know I promised you, but they're screwing around with the budget. Can you give me one more quarter?" Again, like, what are you going to say? But I told him, I said, "I can't do a third bill. I mean, I'm 25% of this match, and I've got to at least be up in that same neighborhood somewhere." And right at the end of that second quarter, he got fired, and Ole took over. So, I told him, I told Ole, I said, "Hey, we need to talk. This has been my deal with Bill. You can talk to Bill." And he said, "Yeah, come down to the office Monday." So I went down to see him. And I'm expected to walk in and basically have papers there to sign. And he takes me back to his office, and it was strange. It was a part of the office I'd never been in before. And so like I'm sort of off balance because I'm in unfamiliar surroundings. And he said, "Well, I've looked at your deal." He said, "I don't really know what you're complaining about." He said, "Because that's what I made when I was your age." And I started laughing. I said, "When you were my age, what was a steak dinner? $3.95. What was a hotel room? $12 a night." I mean, like, it's a little more expensive out there now. And in short order, I don't think he was there long in that run, but I was able to get up into that neighborhood finally. But it was that was Ole. Well, you're making $300 a night. What do you complain about? The other guy's making $250,000 a year.
It's one of those things where people keep saying that Ole was stuck in the past, but they also say that about his booking as well. So back in the 70s, he was heralded as a fantastic booker. I mean, I suppose you had to do a lot less back then than these days, especially where you've got so much TV to fill. And then at some point in the 80s, his booking style becomes outdated. And then, one of the big examples is in the late 80s or early 90s, I can't remember which one it is. There's Ric Flair versus Junkyard Dog and Rocky King, that sort of like race-heavy storyline that was hovering around, sort of the turn of the decade that no one really enjoyed. Right. What characterized Ole's booking in the later years, as far as you could see, and what was outdated about it?
Well, look at again, like I was always when I was teaching, right? I would tell my students as history, you can't look through a contemporary lens. We play a fool's game in 2024, trying to look back to say 1700 and say, well, they were horrible human beings because, well, those people lived in the 1700s. We're in 2024 now. Same thing back to Ole's booking. He had come up in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and those were the things that were. The nation was going back and forth. Of course, in the 60s, we had the Martin Luther King and the whole civil rights movement. The country had a tectonic change, but there were still a lot of people that were still stuck in that. They had the feet firmly planted and wouldn't budge from it. And so I think that was part of it. But also then at the same time, you started seeing like bookers like Dusty Rhodes, right? Coming out a lot more colorful, throwing a lot more stuff into it, take it from black and white to technicolor, we'll say. And all of a sudden, I don't think on the semantics of Ole's booking that it was it was wrong or not usable anymore. I just think that by tying it with the types of storylines that he would, like you mentioned, the race stuff. And I remember one time in WWE at the same time. Rocky Johnson was having an angle with Don Morocco, and Grand Wizard would be in the camera doing his thing, and behind him, Don would be sweeping the floor, eating fried chicken. I remember even as a kid, like cringing, But you can see like this, like wrestling was still dragging from that distant past and making this move into, and I think that's also part of what, like, as I think about it now. When you started looking at people like Dusty Rhodes' booking and Pat Patterson's booking, that it still had, tons of overture of that old school wrestling. But suddenly you got a guy like Dusty Rhodes who just had that incredible gift of gab. and just such a telegenic presence. And in the WWE, I think Pat Patterson was quick to figure that too. If you go back and look at the time that he was doing the announcing and transcending into the booking, all of a sudden he's pulling himself off TV at the time that most people were looking at their big years in the ring, their big money years, because there were guys like Hulk Hogan coming up, nowhere near as good a wrestler, but just this incredible presence, full of charisma. And so wrestling was moving from we'll say the dark ages into this technicolor age of over the top flamboyancy. And remember Hogan with the big boa and all of that, the sunglasses and everything. And prior to that, it was black boots and black tights, two guys walking to the ring and wrestling. And I think Ole was, if there was any criticism of his booking, because he was a pretty damn good booker, it was that he was basing in those the ethos of, say, the 50s and 60s, but also damned bound to, it's going to be that black boots and black tights and two guys who got to beat the hell out of each other. And, that becomes a bit mundane, especially when you're juxtaposing that with American Dream, Dusty Road, baby, and the Hulkster, eating your vitamins and all of that. It was just like young kids, especially. I'd always gravitated towards the guys that could work and wrestle. But you were certainly impressed by this over the top stuff that you were seeing. It seemed like in line with what culture was doing. You look at movies of the 50s and 60s, some incredible movies, but then you move into the 70s and 80s and you see them really, I just this morning watched Godfather 2, and I thought, boy, like, it's one incredible movie. There's not a second of that movie that you're watching and going, man, this is sort of a little bit dry right now. It's just the whole time you're like waiting to see what's going to happen next. It was just a very different way of conducting movie making, and I think a very different way of conducting booking. And a large part of what we see today in wrestling, I think both good and bad, is where that road has taken us from there. It's the next vision. What's the next visionary in wrestling? And we've seen some incredible stuff, some incredibly athletic men and women come into our business. We've seen the rise of the divas, things that could never have happened in that kind of way back in the 60s and 50s and even like early mid 70s. Moolah, as long as she had been around the business and everything, she was sort of like an aberration, like on the card, like almost like an added attraction. It wasn't like, okay, the women's division.
She was like the midgets.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And now you see like just the I would argue in many ways in the WWE and the AEW, it seems that the women's division seems to have a lot more oomph behind it, a lot more emphasis being placed on it than in the past. So again, with each generation, they get to put their stamp on things. And I think like with Ole's booking, that's a big part of it, is that it was just the changing of the times and the world kept spinning, and these guys were sort of dragging and holding back into that what they knew. And and then when you add to that the second page of these larger than life, overly charismatic, and suddenly with the advent of cable television, everybody can see this stuff. I can only read about Ole and the Four Horsemen in magazines, and now all of a sudden I'm seeing it. Now I'm seeing the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, and you can just see where the business, where it eventually reached into that 50+ million per week watching. It was just a basic part of the American culture.